Okay, now we're going to go on to the guided practice. Okay, this is the Martin Luther King Jr. speech I had mentioned to you previously. You're going to have to refer to the link provided, either on the Blackboard lesson or the YouTube More. I can't actually provide a physical copy of this one because there are copyright restrictions on it, but I am linking a site that has an officially authorized copy of this. You need to read it, and you need to have it open while we do the questions. So print it out, do whatever you need to do, or open it in another window on your web browser or something of that nature, okay? But it has to be open. You're going to have to read it too, okay? So some background. Martin Luther King Jr. was born in 1929, and he was assassinated in 1968. He's a famous civil rights hero. And Martin Luther King Jr. was an American Christian minister of the SCLC and activist who became the most visible spokesperson and leader in the civil rights movement from 1955 until his assassination in 1968. Born in Atlanta, Georgia, King is best known for advancing civil rights through nonviolence and civil disobedience, inspired by his Christian beliefs and the nonviolent activism of Mahatma Gandhi. His 1963 I Have a Dream speech was a landmark in both civil rights and rhetoric and was delivered in Washington, D.C. at the March on Washington. Okay, so remember to have your speech links open for the question segment. It's found on Blackboard or may be linked on YouTube in the more below this video. Okay, so make sure. I'm very serious. You can't do a text exercise without the text. So make sure you click that link and go to the provided site, and we'll get started, okay? Again, I cannot legally reprint this text, so do not ask. Use the link to the officially licensed free text. Please do not link unlicensed texts in the comments. Okay, and the link is there. And you can also listen to the whole speech at archive.org, details MLK Dream. Okay, and both those are legitimate authorized texts. Okay, so, you could listen to this as well as read it. You could do both. On the exam, they're never going to give you a listening, an auditory version of it. You're always going to have to read it. But while we're going through it right now, I don't see any problem with it. Okay? So the first thing we're going to do is look at paragraphs 1 through 4. I assume you've already read the text. If you haven't, pause the video right now, press the space bar or tap your phone, read the speech, and then we'll start. I'll give you one moment to do that. Okay, we're back. So paragraphs 1 through 4. We're going to be looking at those very keenly. Okay, let's find the simile, the metaphor, the analogy. What document is alluded to continuously? Who is the great American? Why are they standing in his shadow? What check is cashed? What is the analogy describing? How do you think Martin Luther King Jr. feels about slavery? This is an easy question. If you get this wrong, I'm going to be worried. What is his point of view? What are his views about the treatment of African Americans? What's the main idea? How does organization impact the tone of the piece? Okay? Think about that. I'll give you a moment. Remember, at any time you could pause the video by pressing the space bar or tapping your phone or mobile device. Okay, we're back. All right, so the simile, the metaphor, what documents alluding to continuously, who's the great American, why are they standing in his shadow, what check is cashed, what is the analogy comparing. Again, you can pause at any time. All right, so the simile as a beacon of hope. Okay, in the first paragraph, this momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. Okay? So, as a beacon of hope. It's a comparison using like or as. Metaphor. Okay? That's shortly thereafter, where it says, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. Why? Okay? So he's saying there's still a lingering impact of slavery. Okay? And if you're a younger person, the term before African American was blacks, and then Negro in the 1960s was the proper term for African American person. So if you're wondering why the terminology is different, that's why. You could ask your parents or grandparents and they'll tell you about it. Who is the great American? It's Lincoln. Why are they standing in his shadow? They're at the Lincoln Monument. That's where the speech is. The March on Washington, the monument with the fella sitting, that's Abraham Lincoln, and he's sitting at the Lincoln Monument. Metaphorically, it's the step after freeing the slaves is the civil rights movement, getting rid of segregation. Okay? So they see themselves as inheriting from Lincoln. Okay? Not just physically, he's making that connection to Lincoln, but he's also saying, okay, we're moving forward. What check is cashed? This is kind of tricky. This is where you get into an extended analogy. It's in the 4th paragraph. In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. Blah, blah, blah. They were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. It was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, should be guaranteed the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay? So, when he says what check is cashed, he says we were promised something a long time ago, and now we want to cash it in to get these unalienable rights of equality. So what's the analogy comparing? Okay? This can be tricky if you're not reading this carefully. It's comparing a bad promissory note to the condition of African Americans post-slavery. Okay? If you don't know what a promissory note is, it's a kind of financial device. It's kind of like a check, but not really. It's a note with interest. So if you write a promissory note, it would say, like on a mortgage, it's kind of like a mortgage, where you'd say, okay, I'm lending you $1,000, but you have to pay me back $1,100 or something of that nature. Okay? How do you think MLK feels about slavery, reparations? Let's look at the text for a source, okay, when we are answering these questions about the treatment of African Americans. What such treatment in particular? What's the main idea of the piece, and how does the organization impact it? Again, you should pause this, press the space bar, or tap your phone or mobile device. Look back at the text and try and find the answers. Okay? I'll give you one moment to do that now. Okay, we're back. How does he feel about slavery? Obviously, he's against it. We can see all these repeated invocation of Lincoln, which, what's Lincoln really famous for? Freeing the slaves, okay? And obviously he's an African-American man who's a civil rights hero. He's going to be against slavery. If you get that wrong, like I said, we have some problems. Okay, reparations. We don't know, but maybe he's probably more than likely for it, but you can't really tell. About the treatment of African-Americans. He specifically uses some terminology. He talks about things as heinous and racist, and he speaks about certain particular places and states. Okay? He talks about the horrors of police brutality. Okay? That's one such treatment. Okay? That's a specific treatment. Talks about segregation in general, but when you're looking at the text, look for a specific example. Always look for a specific example. Okay? It says, the Negro is the victim of unspeakable horrors of police brutality. Okay? We cannot be satisfied as long as our bodies, etc., mobility, we cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro's basic mobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one. Okay, etc. For whites only. That's segregation. Okay? So what's the main idea of the piece? This is subtle, but it's ending discrimination is American. Okay? And the way he gets there is he begins by connecting to Lincoln with the monument he's standing under. Talks about the Emancipation Proclamation. That's when Lincoln freed the slaves. He talks about that continuously. When he says, he makes an allusion when he says 70 years ago, that's actually an allusion to Lincoln at the beginning of one of his addresses. The Gettysburg Address says 77 years ago. Okay? So he makes a bunch of allusions to Lincoln. And he's connecting himself to Lincoln, who's the great freer of the slaves. He won the Civil War that brought our country together. He ends with My Country 'Tis of Thee, okay, which was one of our unofficial national anthems before 1931. And another thing about organization that a lot of people don't pick up on is the peroration. You don't have to know this word, but it's a specific technique where at the conclusion, the speaker amps things up, kind of gets fired up. It's a very fancy word for getting fired up. And it's from the Latin School of Rhetoric. And, people used to tear open their shirts, all sorts of things to really get the audience going. And sometimes it can be partially improvised. And in Martin Luther King Jr.'s case, parts of this actually were, because there was a call and response, which is very typical of some of the some preachers, especially some of the Baptist preachers in urban areas and whatnot. Mahalia Jackson, who's a very famous singer, and she was herself a civil rights activist, was actually there. And you can hear it on some of the audio recordings, where when Martin Luther King starts talking about the dream, I have a dream, she says, "Tell me about that dream, Martin." And he goes more in depth and starts improvising. So it's a call and response. He's saying something. Someone from the audience was shouting something back. And then he improvised a peroratio, a peroration right there on the spot. Okay, so the organization is very reflective in a lot of ways of a lot of different things that affect the tone. That call and response is very part of a lot of the Baptist churches, this style of preaching. Okay, gets the audience very involved. And that kind of sets the tone in a very unique way. The use of connecting to Lincoln. He starts by connecting to Lincoln with the monument, which is right behind him. He connects literally to something that's right next to him, and in a deeper metaphorical way by saying, we're part of this heritage, the My Country 'Tis of Thee. He's trying to connect the civil rights movement to the national anthem of the country when he says, "Let freedom ring." He's trying to say this isn't just about the African Americans, it's about all Americans and freedom. And ending discrimination in America is an American idea. It's a very clever piece. Okay? So let's look at the second selection. It starts with "Let Us Not." It's paragraphs 15 to 24 and 28 until the end. And on the audio recording, it's at about 10 minutes and 41 seconds in. I'll give you one moment to find your place there. I have to find my place too. Okay, where it says, "Let us not wallow in the valley of despair. I say to you, my friends, And even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. Okay? So I'll give you a moment. If you haven't read that already, you should be reading that right now. So starting there, okay, read that, 15 to 24, and then 28 till the end. It's right after the picture of the mall, okay? So scroll down past that on that particular web page. Okay, so remember, you can pause at any time or tap on your mobile device or phone to pause. Okay, I'll give you one moment to do that. And please read the passage. Okay, we're back. So let's go over some of the questions, okay? What phrase or phrases are repeated? Remember, repetition's a literary device. What effect does repetition have on the listener? What are some examples of imagery? Okay? What allusion is repeated throughout 24 to 28? Why? Why are specific states listed? What is the intent of this? Who is the audience? What do you think the author's position is on nullification? What might it be? What is the main idea of the piece and some supporting details? You should probably pause this, press the space bar, or tap your phone or mobile device. Go back in the passage and start looking for the answers. Okay? I'll be back in a moment. Okay, we're back. All right, what phrase or phrases are repeated? Okay, I have a dream is repeated from 15 to 24, and let freedom ring is repeated from 24 to 28, and that latter is from the My Country 'Tis of Thee that we mentioned before. Okay, what effect does repetition have on the listener? It hammers home a point of a future possibility. What are some examples of imagery? Okay, there's a great one right here where it says, I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave masters will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. Okay, it really paints a picture, okay, of people sitting down together at a table. Okay, I have a dream that in the Mississippi, a state sweltering with heat of injustice, it'll be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. Okay? Okay, so you also have imagery throughout the piece, but it's very visual. Okay, what allusion is repeated throughout 24 to 28? Why? Again, we said, My Country 'Tis of Thee. It's to link the patriotism, the civil rights movement. Why are specific states listed? Okay, if we look in the passage right below that, it says, go back to Mississippi, go back to Alabama, go back to South Carolina, go back to Georgia, go back to Louisiana, go back to the slums and ghettos of our northern cities, knowing that somehow this situation can and will be changed. It's to relate to the crowd. It's an appeal to the audience that we talked about earlier. He's giving shout outs, basically saying, okay, here's my people here, here's my people there. Okay, he's making an appeal to the audience, and it's a good one. Okay? And what's the intent of this? It's to inspire. That's the intent of the entire piece. They will ask you questions like this on the GED, and you do have to take a moment to think, well, why is he doing this? Is he doing this to get people riled up? Is he doing this to, go this way or that way? One of the things he says throughout the piece is he's into nonviolence, and he's into working together with all the different people. So he's not for a separate nation for certain groups or anything of that nature. Who's the audience? I'll leave this one open for you. Think about this, okay? So it's wider than you think, and it's less than you think at the same time. What do you think the author's position is on nullification? So what you have to do is go back to the text and find where he talks about nullification. I'll give you a moment to do that. There's a part where he says, I have a dream that one day down in Alabama with its vicious racists, with the governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. Okay? So obviously he's against nullification. He thinks it's racist. It doesn't say, I think nullification's racist, but it says, down in Alabama with its vicious racists and the governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day, right here in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and girls. Okay? So it's a vision of unity. And he's against nullification, if you can't tell. Okay? So a lot of times they'll say, well, what's the point of view of the author? Okay, that's what I'm asking you there. What's the point of view on this specific topic, nullification? So you have to go back to the text, find where it says nullification, and the sentence before said so-and-so's a racist, and this guy has his lips dripping, talking about this. He's for interposition and nullification. So I guess the guy thinks it's bad, right? You don't have to know what those are. Okay, you can infer what the author's viewpoint is. Okay, and he thinks it's racist. You're going to do that a lot on the GED exam. So pay careful attention. What's the main idea of this piece? Some supporting details. The main idea is civil rights are American. It constantly links to the past and tradition to support social progress. Oh, before I forget, that also had imagery before about that black children and white children holding hands and playing together. Okay, that's imagery. This contains virtually no facts. It's almost entirely emotional appeal, and it's the hallmark of a great piece of rhetoric. Okay? So this is a great piece to reread, too, if you're unclear about what some of these things are. This speech has almost all of them. It's really a fantastic speech. Okay? And one of the things I would recommend is that you listen to this speech, because Martin Luther King Jr. was such a fantastic speaker, as well as author of this sort of speech. And it's really phenomenal to hear. So that archive.org link I mentioned, really check that out. It's a really fantastic speech. Okay, and that's all for this lesson, and I'll see you next time.